Good afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students. Okay, thank you. Sit down. Okay, what we are going to actually do for our lesson today is we are going to look at some of those features which are now formed in the last stage of the study on development of River Valley. We have looked at our study on erosion of rivers, especially by looking at the river in three sections. And the three sections again are the upper course of a river, the features that are formed in the upper stage of a river. Then we have looked at the middle stage or the middle course of the river and the features mainly to do with depositional and erosional features on the concave and the convex bank. And today what I'd like us to look at will be mainly the features which are formed in the last stage of a river valley. I am not going to explain the formation of those features as I have given you a task to do. And that task is in groups. You were supposed to pick one of those features in the last stage of a river valley, and you were supposed to explain to the class how that particular feature is actually formed. But what we will do today is we are going to look at some pictures put together showing some of those different features that you have been asked to do some research work on and also to present to the class. Okay, let's check now, looking at some of those features and a profile of the development of a river valley from the source right down to the mouth of the river. Again, I have explained that when we are looking at the river itself in terms of the valley which is formed by the work of the river, we start from the upland areas with a higher or steeper gradient, V-shaped valley due to vertical erosion, features such as interlocking spurs, features such as potholes, waterfalls, and rapids are actually common. The river flows into the second stage. That's where the river starts to meander. You can see evidence of erosion on the concave banks and deposition on the convex banks. In the second stage, the gradient is said to be moderate. The flow of the water is a little bit more slower in comparison to the first stage. Finally, we come to the last stage of the river valley. And in the last stage now, you can see, if you're looking at this long profile, note the flat area. And within this flat area, we have also features such as levees, which are common or found. We have meander loops that are found in this last stage. We also have the mouth of the river in this last stage. We also have the flow of the water in the last stage in comparison to the second and the first stage to be very slow. The banks tend to be a little bit more wider, or the banks can be wide in comparison to the second and the first stage. Looking at the river bank, perhaps if we have to look at the Fly River, which is the biggest river in Papua New Guinea, if you stand on one side of the Fly River, or if you stand on a bank of the Fly River at the mouth, and you try to look across the mouth to the other side to see the other bank, it will be impossible. You cannot see the other bank simply because the bank itself is very wide. So to the mouth or to the last stage, you will find that the river bank is actually very wide. Also note that because of the fact that the water flowing in the last stage is slow, the most dominant work now carried out in this last stage will be deposition. Most of those features which are formed in the last stage of a river valley are depositional features. And it is your task to explain those different features. So if we had to look at the development of a floodplain, a well-developed floodplain that is, then you can see a cross-sectional diagram here showing some of the features that you have been asked to actually explain. You have the meanders, the river bluffs which are found. They mark the edge of the floodplain. The floodplain is this area here, the flat area, which has actually been formed as a result of erosion and deposition of the bend. Then we have features like the Oxbow Lakes or the billabongs, as they are called by the Australians. The Australians call the Oxbow Lakes billabongs. We also have features such as sandbars or point bars, which are actually created. They can form depositional islands, especially at the mouth of the river. We have alluvium deposits. Those alluvium deposits can actually be raised also to build up features such as levees, which are raised areas along the river banks. Also at this stage, you can have the river turning to braid. Like when you plait your hair, or some of you might be making braids on your hair, sometimes the rivers can also, instead of following just one channel, they can actually follow more than one channel, and that's where we say braiding comes in. Again, what we can see on the monitor here are some examples of depositional features which are common mainly in the last stage of the river valley. Okay, let's look at some of the pictures or photographs now put together to show some of those features. As I have mentioned, I am not going to explain those features simply because you have been given the task to explain them. Okay, from this particular photograph, you can see there a small-scale delta which is formed in a lake in Austria. So a delta is also a depositional feature. Here we are looking at a deposition of sediments, mainly at the mouth of this particular river. Okay, let's look at the second photograph or picture to show some of the depositional features. You have gravel bars which are along the banks and in the middle of a stream. You can also note, if you look carefully at this particular photograph, note the sand deposit which are on the boulders at the right. So here you can see the sand deposit sitting on top of those pebbles or the boulders. But again, these are depositional features in the bed, the stream bed, which have been formed as a result of accumulation of sediment. Some of you have been given the task to look at point bars or bars. You might find yourself having to explain how those features are actually created. Another of the depositional feature, note the braiding of the river itself into many different channels as the river is actually flowing out towards the mouth itself. And along here also you will note a lot of deposition of materials or sediment. You can also see the well-developed floodplain, that is the area from one bank right across to the other side, and all of that has been formed as a result of erosion and deposition. Depositional features, again, mainly looking at sediments or sand, and you note the braiding of the river in this particular photograph. This is at the mouth or the last stage of the river valley we're looking at. Rivers meandering. You can see the twist and the turning of the river like a snake-like formation. The twist and the turn is referred to as meander. And beside the meandering, you can also see the sand deposit in this particular river, mainly on the convex or the inside bank, because on the outside bend or the concave bank, that's where erosion will be dominant. We have a lot of this site in Papua New Guinea also, especially when you're flying in the area of Western Province and the Sepik region. You can see a lot of river meandering. Okay, another feature, the point bar or the bar itself, deposition mainly on the inside bank. We have a sample of a delta as taken from high above. And here we're looking at the Mississippi Delta, which is the mouth of the Mississippi River out towards the sea, and the deposition as shown there in the yellow color. An example of Billabong or an Oxbow Lake. We have two of them as shown here. And here we're looking at River Murray, that's in Australia, and that's showing the feature Billabong. And note there also features common usually in the last stage of a river valley. Okay, so those are some of the depositional features, of which all of those depositional features you have been given the task to actually explain in detail how they are formed. Beside that, you were also given other features, like some of you or a group will be explaining about River Gorge, what is a gorge and how it is formed. Maybe another group is going to actually look at the formation of canyon, river canyon, and how they are formed. The other group also been given the task of looking at a plunge pool, of which those three, you do not find them in the last stage of a river valley, but they come in to do with features which are formed as a result of river erosion and deposition. Okay, so if we had to look at some samples of those features which are not in the last stage of a river valley, but to do with rivers forming those different features, we look at the famous Grand Canyon. Note that the Grand Canyon is actually a feature which also has been carved or sculptured by the Colorado River. So if we're looking at the canyon itself, here is an example of one of the famous canyons in the world, shaped by rivers also. The Grand Canyon, the River Colorado flowing between those areas which have been actually carved out, or the floor which has been carved out by that River Colorado. Still looking at another view of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River flowing here, which has actually contributed then to the formation of the canyon itself and the features that have been formed. Still within the Grand Canyon, another maybe shot of the river and the features that are produced. And some more samples giving us an example of a canyon. So the group that's doing the work on the canyon, you'll have to also explain what a canyon is and how it is actually formed. But here are just some examples of the Grand Canyon. The group doing the plunge pool, this feature here, it's not a depositional feature, so therefore it's not together with the floodplain on the last stage. Your task also to explain what a plunge pool is and how it is formed. Okay, so having looked at that information, the next thing now that we are going to do is, I have prepared some activities that I would like you to make note of into your exercise book, but we are not going to actually give answers to those activities in our lesson today. You are going to make note of the activities, and then you will complete those activities for homework. After you have made note of the activities to do with revision work on what we have covered on rivers, then I will give you time to actually sit down and discuss and also finalize your presentation for the next lesson. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to make note of the 6 activities. Do not get the answers down. You just make note of those activities and you will be required to complete them for your homework. I'll give you at least 3 minutes to copy the first 3 on the, not the chart, but on the monitor, and then we'll look at the other 2 activities to be copied. Okay, since most students have made note of those 4 activities, let's move on now to the 5th one. Okay, for the next activity, you will be required to copy down a table into your exercise book. You will have 3 columns. When you copy down this particular table, there'll be 3 columns, and in the left-hand column, you are going to place the following terms with their correct explanation. And the terms are traction, solution, and suspension. Make note of those 3 words, because when you fill in or when you copy the table, at least those 3 words, you will be required to put them with the correct explanation. The words are traction, solution, suspension. Just copy those 3 words down or make note of those 3 words. Okay, for the 3rd column, because you are going to construct 3 columns into your exercise book, on the first column, you're going to put in the words traction, solution, or suspension, depending on the explanation, which will go in the middle. And on the last column, you will be required to put in the following words, of which they are to do with stream load. And the words are dissolved load, bed load, suspended load. Again, you make note only of those 3 words, of which they will go on the right column. Dissolved load, bed load, suspended load. Okay, I'll repeat again. The first three words, that is traction, solution, and suspension, you will have to put them in the right-hand column when you construct a column into your exercise book. And those words are to do with the erosion of materials along riverbed. The middle column, there will be explanations given, of which you will copy very shortly. On the third column, you are expected to put in the correct process showing the different load carried by a stream, and the words are dissolved load, bed load, and suspended load. Okay, now for you to copy down the column and the explanation. Again, I'll give you at least 5 minutes. Remember those 6 words you've made note of? Those 6 words, 3 of them come under transportational process, and the other 3 comes under type of load carried. You copy that information, and then you are going to put in the appropriate word into either the first column or the third column. I'll read that out so that for those who are far can actually make note of it also. Stream transportation of clay, stream transportation of clay and silt particles kept afloat because of swift flow and turbulence. Again, stream transportation of clay and silt particles kept afloat because of swift flow and turbulence. Okay, the second lot of activity, stream transportation of sand, gravel, and stone by sliding or rolling along the bottom. I'll repeat. Stream transportation of sand, gravel, and stone by sliding or rolling along the bottom. And finally, the last one, stream transportation of dissolved load. Okay, have you all made note of that information? Okay, we go back to the instructions so that you know exactly what you're supposed to do. You have now constructed 3 columns into your exercise book, of which the first column has the heading transportation process. The second column has the explanation, and the third column has type of load carried. You go back to the instruction, and you were supposed to copy the table into your notebook. You have done that. In the left-hand column, you check. In the left-hand column, you place the following terms with their correct explanation. And the terms are traction, solution, or suspension. You'll have to select one of those to go with the correct explanation. And there are 3 explanations, therefore, there are 3 words. One should match the correct explanation. In the right-hand column, you already made note of the 3 stream load types, and they are dissolved load, bed load, suspended load. You select again which one goes best with the explanation, and you put it in the third column. Okay, we'll move on. Finally, the last activity is again a table that you have to actually copy and to complete for your homework. Okay, this time when you're copying down the table into your notebook, in the left-hand column, you place the following terms with their correct explanation. And the words now that I'd like you to make note are corrosion, hydraulic action, abrasion. Corrosion, hydraulic action, and abrasion. Just make note of the 3 words. Okay, on a separate table, of which you will be required to make note of now. And this time you have only 2 columns. And the first column will put in one of those words that have been mentioned, and the explanation is given. So into your exercise book, for the final activity, you have only 2 columns to construct. the first column, you'll put in the correct erosional process, and you're expected to make note of the explanation. Okay, the first explanation given there, tearing action of running water, water erosion by force or pressure. Second explanation, weighing action of running water, carrying rock particles which scratch, scrape, and erode by friction. I'll repeat that second explanation again. Weighing action of running water, carrying rock particles which scratch, scrape, and erode by friction. And the third explanation, dissolving action of running water carrying weak acids. Okay, again, we go back to the instruction for this particular table so you know exactly what you're supposed to do. In the left-hand corner, or column, sorry, in the left-hand column, all you have to do is you place the correct term with the correct explanation. And the terms are corrosion, hydraulic action, and abrasion. So you have 3 words for the second table. Okay, we have those activities. Okay, those activities then you will be required to actually complete for your homework. For the meantime, you should be finalizing now and having your chart, your explanations actually ready, and we will start off with our presentation in our next lesson. So I hope you are going to be ready with your presentation of work. And most of the features that we have been given to work on are depositional features, except for the plunge pool, the canyon, and the gorge. They are to do with the second stage of a river valley or the first stage of a river valley, features in the second or the first. Otherwise, all of those other features you have been assigned are mainly found in the last stage of a river valley. Any queries or questions with regard to what we have looked at or what we have covered in our lesson today? Queries or questions? So we're going to be ready for our presentation tomorrow? Yes? Okay, very good. That will also bring us to the end of our lesson. Class, if you could now stand up. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 76 is Oxbow. Good afternoon and thank you, students.